Hey everyone, and welcome to Squidly Bits, our second channel packed with painting tutorials, guides and quicker miniature content to give you that miniature fix while you're waiting for a main channel video every week. And today we're gonna smash out a beautiful miniature from start to finish in painting Dhuukas that is part of the paint set that we just released. And of course, as always, every paint used in this video is also available in these paint sets. So if you guys want to paint like us, you can pick it all up by following the link down in the video description. Now, Dhuukas, it is time for you to start with the first part of the mini.
Let's go. Now, to paint the best wood texture you've ever painted, you need to grab the following paints from our paint set: Dark Rust, Dark Flesh Tone, Sunny Skin Tone, and Cayman Green. The first step is to give the entire area a base coat of Dark Rust. Yes, of course, I made sure to prime the mini black, of course. First part of the wood texture to tackle is highlighting the cut-off sections of the log. Usually, depending on the wood type you have, this area on the wood is slightly brighter than the bark itself. So to achieve this effect, I'll add a first layer of Sunny Skin Tone and Dark Rust mixed to about 50-50. When highlighting, try to follow the shape of the age rings with your paintbrush. And if your mini doesn't have these rings, then just try your best to freehand them as best as you can. And if you really suck at painting freehands, maybe check out our masterclass showing in-depth how to actually paint some really good freehands. You can go from zero to hero, just like Emil. I will move in with one more highlight, just adding a little bit extra of that Sunny Skin Tone to the mix. Now moving on to the bark of the wood. I start by applying a 60-40 mix of Dark Flesh Tone and Dark Rust as the first highlight, painting the entire surface of each and every strand of bark on the top 50% of the log, meaning I only paint the things from the sides up that's angled towards the sky. And also making sure to leave some of that dark rust in the grooves between the bark strands on top of the log. To add more interest, I now bring some Sunny Skin Tone to the same mix. Here I make sure to add the highlight really carefully and deliberate, adding small textures as I go. A nice thing to keep in mind is to try and add this highlight as close as possible to the grooves of the dark rust. This will make the entire thing feel really crisp and wood-like. Now the last piece of highlight will be done in super small areas in the topmost places with 50% Sunny Skin Tone and 50% of the Dark Flesh Tone Dark Rust mix. Adding this as a fine edge highlights and super small dots. And after this step, you could be done with the entire wood texture. However, I like to take things a little bit extra and make it as good as you can, bringing out the Cayman Green and painting some vines on the entire wood. This will break up the wood nicely and help it feel more interesting. A nice way of making these types of patterns are to dilute the paint properly, then allowing your hand to shake a little bit as you paint the strokes will help you create that natural look to your vines. Now that you have your vines all painted, you should have something that looks like this.
Thanks, Dhuukas, for your part. Now it's time for me to take over, and we're gonna start with the skin. And to the wet palette, I'm adding burnt red, skin tone, and pale flesh. The first thing that we want to do is cover all the skin areas with a 50-50 mix of burnt red and skin tone. This gives us a mid-tone, dark, rosy flesh kind of base coat. It's just important to make sure that it isn't too dark so that it reads as dark brown, but more as a desaturated pink. I cover all of these parts with 2 thin coats to make sure that it's fully covering in all of the skin areas. With those 2 layers fully dried, it is time to add our first highlight. We still have this first skin tone mix on our wet palette. And to make our first highlight, we have to mix in about 50% skin tone with this first skin mix, making it about 75% skin tone to burnt red. We apply the color to all of the areas that are angled upwards towards the sky, as well as the center of the face, meaning the forehead and the top of the nose and the cheekbones. We cannot forget to do this on the hands and feet as well, only leaving the areas that is fully angled downwards with our first skin tone color, and the rest of the parts should be highlighted with the second mix. With this coat down, it's time for the second one. Just add a tiny itsy bitsy more amount of skin tone to our mix, making it about 85% skin tone to the 15% burnt red. This time add it to the same areas as previously, but this time focusing on slightly smaller areas, pushing the highlights on the areas closest to our light source even a bit more. This helps to fill out any unevenly applied areas with the first highlight and helps pushing the contrast. We're gonna add one more final highlight to the skin. This time we just add a tiny bit of pale flesh to our previous highlight color. And this color we really don't want to push in too many areas. We want to make sure that it's just added to the top areas of each of the skin parts. The top of the cheekbones, the inner areas around the nose ridge, as well as the top of the forehead. Just make sure to fully highlight the hands and the feet so they stay just as beautiful as the face. Now my dudes, the skin tones are almost done. There is one final step, but we're gonna add that at the end of the paint job. Now it is time to block off some areas using the color Dark Rust. All of the areas that are going to be colored in any shade of brown is going to be base coated with Dark Rust, meaning the beard, the eyebrows, the leather straps, his leg warmers, his belt, and the tiny little orb he's got in his hand, as well as the hood on his head. We can now start highlighting the beard. I mix about 50% Dark Rust with 50% Parasite Brown. We add this first highlight in strokes from the top to the bottom to about 90% of the beard areas, as well as the hair and eyebrows, leaving just the edges with the Dark Rust base coat. For our next part though, we want to come in with more Parasite Brown and use it in a layer consistency. Using the same downward strokes, adding it to slightly less areas, leaving more of the edges with the darker colors than we're adding right now. Focusing on the middle of his beard as well as the top of it. As a final highlight, I mix in a dab of Sunny Skin Tone to our Parasite Brown and just add this to the most raised areas of the beard, even more to the center, just to make the center of the miniature and the face our main focal point. We can then apply these exact steps to all of the rest of the hairs, eyebrows and mustaches. With that, you should be done with the beard and hair. But guys, we got some pretty big areas left to cover right now. Let's start with his tunic. I'm covering the whole tunic in Cayman green, adding 2 coats to get a full coverage. I then add some lime green to the palette. And because this paint is somewhat translucent, I can add a layer of highlight directly on the Cayman green without mixing it anything with the previous color. Adding it to all of the folds of the tunic angled upwards, as well as the stuff that is angled directly to the viewer. But still leaving the bottom part of the tunic without any lime green highlights. I then go over with the exact same paint a second time on the areas most raised upwards to punch the saturation in these areas even a bit more. For his hood, let's keep it simple. We have our dark rust and parasite brown mix on the palette. If we dab in a tiny bit of pale flesh to that, we can then add some textures to the top of his cape. We can add a second coat with again the same colors by just adding a tiny bit more of pale flesh and stipple that into the center of the hood, and voila, we get a nice looking hood. I'm using the same colors to highlight his leg warmers and wristbands as well, but you can go nuts with other brown colors if you want to. And with that, there is one more thing I really want to teach you guys before the end of the video. We've got some leaves on the miniature around his head and on his belt. If we use dark green as our base coat, and then for our highlight just add a tiny bit of ice yellow, we can highlight the leaves as well as the base to create a really nice green that has a completely different tone to the tunic he's wearing, making him a proper forest dwarf. For his orb, I'm using the same gold colors we taught you guys all about in our NMM gold painting tutorial. One final detail to add, since this guy is out all the time, his cheekbones and nose are always a bit rosy. I do a super thin down red glaze using scarlet red on our wet palette and just glaze a little bit of that red on his nose as well as on the cheekbones between our shadow color and the mid-tone, just to add a little bit more life. And with that, we should have the most beautiful forest dwarf you've ever seen. So my dudes, go grab yourself the paint sets used in this video if you guys want to paint like us. Also, we have about 400 wet palettes left of the 4,000 that we initially ordered. So if you guys want to be one of the last 10% of people that gets the wet palette, make sure to pick one up now before it's too late. There's a new painting tutorial coming every week to help you get the most from these sets, so make sure that you're subscribed if you want to see more. Also, massive thanks to all of our patrons. You guys are amazing. Thank you for supporting us. Have a great day. Peace out, motherfuckers!